He keeps on dying, but essentially then he wakes up. And it's almost like in this constant state of waking from nightmare into another nightmare. And it's just endless torture. And so it felt to me as an important aspect, when you actually die in the game, we should somehow bring the horror into that moment.
A good game over screen doesn't just serve as a notice that you need to start over. In the survival horror genre, a well-crafted, properly terrifying game over screen should serve as a deterrent, making sure you stay alive the next time to avoid seeing the bloody words "Game Over" appear on your screen. And sometimes, like in Alan Wake 2, they could be so terrifying you never want to die again. IGN got a chance to speak with Alan Wake 2 creative director Sam Lake to discuss how Remedy created its terrifying game over screen. Alan Wake 2 is finally here to pick up the writer's story 13 years later. Unlike the first game, which was more of a supernatural action thriller, Remedy has gone full survival horror for the sequel, with an emphasis on horror. Having played the game for a couple of days, I can say confidently that Remedy nails the genre, deploying their mastery of atmosphere and tone to create one of the best survival horror games this decade.
It's a horror game. We are using live action material in various ways in the experience. Obviously we've done live action quite a bit in the past, and I love using it. And I think that it can work as a stylization element and something different inside the game experiences.
The team at Remedy has learned a lot of new tricks since they released the first Alan Wake game. With games like Quantum Break and Control under their belts, the studio has become one of the most cinematically inclined game studios currently working in the industry, mixing live-action footage in with their games to create a visually distinct experience that blurs the lines between mediums. And it's this eye for the movies that led to such a memorable and bloody game over screen.
We started doing more stylization, I feel, in Control, and part of it was using live action and blending it on top of the game footage, specifically with the hotline when you are having these visions of the previous director Trench.
I suppose at the end of the day, a director's most basic duty is to keep the lights on.
Alan Wake 2 is split into two sections where you play as either FBI profiler Saga Anderson or the unfortunate mystery novelist Alan Wake. It's in the Wake section specifically that Remedy's spooky game over screen appears. If Alan Wake is to die, the screen will flash horrifying images of Wake, played in live action by the Finnish actor Ilkka Ville, lying bloody on the ground, his head looking like it's been caved in. Lake says the process of creating the game over screen for Alan Wake was built on top of their experience with working on live action set pieces for Control and Quantum Break. But at the same time, Remedy's relative inexperience in the survival horror genre made the creative process largely trial and error.
We learned things like, okay, how many layers to create this feeling of three-dimensional space when doing it, and how should we do the lighting for the live action shoot so that it works in combo with it. So we have pushed this forward as one aspect of live action, and it's been a process of discovery as well, because originally we were thinking of using that as also for horror and having these flashes of horror imagery in it, basically to symbolize the idea that the forces of supernatural darkness somehow are aware of you or aware of the approaching character and turning their attention to the character, kind of your Eye of Mordor kind of an idea behind it.
However, in this case, mixing the live action footage with the game actually made the horror less intense.
But what we also then discovered fast, that if we want to do this more as an aggressive flash-like thing, the idea of blending it on top of the game footage actually loses its meaning. It isn't giving us anything. So as a category, we are internally talking about blended videos, which we are using for certain moments of reality shifting, and when Saga Anderson is profiling people in her mind place, and when Alan Wake in The Dark Place is seeing these visions of inspiration in the world. But then for more horrifying moments, we started calling them horror flashes, and ended up just doing them kind of like full screen and stylizing them quite strongly, as black and white and just aggressive.
Ultimately, Lake and the team leaned on their leading actor Vili, and in what Lake describes as a long shoot, the team worked with Vili to get the scene just right, no matter how bloody things got.
But it felt like we need to show the horror in between. When you die, we need to make it like disturbing. So we had already kind of discovered that this is how we do horror flashes, and that's suitable for it. But then we wanted to create like just really striking violent imagery for it. And as part of shooting material for live action in the studio, we had a full session of Ilkka Villi as Alan Wake lying on the ground, and we had our makeup artists come in and kind of like create a disturbing, violent vision of him all bloody and kind of having suffered a violent death. This ended up being a relatively long shoot. We just kept adding to the blood on him and on the ground around him, and yes, we can go one step further, and we can go one step further, and we can go one step further, and then we have this whole library of this material.
Lake says that the nightmare that Alan Wake has been trapped in for 13 years is violent and dark, and that this was the most important aspect Remedy wanted to convey to players, that Wake has died in the nightmare many times, and that it's been a living hell for the character.
But trapped by the genre, we're all ripped to pieces along the way.
No!
He keeps on dying, but essentially then he wakes up. And it's almost like in this constant state of waking from nightmare into another nightmare. And it's just endless torture. And so it felt to me as an important aspect, when you actually die in the game, we should somehow bring the horror into that moment. Often, in a game, when you die, well, that moment just before dying is the most horrifying and scary moment, and then it's over, and then you are out of it, and then you reload and go back into the game. But to me, it felt like dying leads into horror, and we need to communicate that it's torture to him. So the idea was, in any case, that we will have him back in his writer's room, and we will show him continuing writing the narrative that kind of like takes him back into the dark place to continue his journey and his exploration.
For Alan Wake 2 and Lake, the game over screen isn't just meant to be a notice for the players that they failed a specific challenge. It's part of the overall story of Alan Wake and his imprisonment in the dark place. It's also, of course, a nice scare to keep the tension high, something that's essential in a survival horror game.
I am happy, and I feel that we have with it achieved what we were after, meaning that, I mean, in some ways, if we think about it, the event of death in video games, your character dying, it kind of easily loses its meaning and its impact, and it just becomes like a matter of frustration. You are trying to get past an obstacle, get past a certain dangerous combat. You fail. More than anything, you feel frustration in that moment, like, trying again. But having this in between keeps that disturbing element as part of it flow, and extends in some ways to me kind of being stuck in this nightmare loop of dying and trying again, brings the horror to it. And this being a horror game, I'm really happy that we have it there.
With Alan Wake 2, Remedy's alchemy of mixing in-game visuals with live-action footage hits new highs. And the fact that the studio's painstaking approach to survival horror bleeds into the game over screen itself is just one of the many ways the studio is raising the bar for itself, the genre, and the medium as a whole. While the screen might be fleeting, the scares will last much, much longer. And I wouldn't have it any other way. For more, check out IGN's review of Alan Wake 2. And if you've seen too much of this terrifying game over screen, check out our guide. And for everything else creepy and spooky, keep it here on IGN.